Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into an interesting and often overlooked chapter of American history, the Gadsden Purchase. You might be familiar with the Louisiana Purchase or the acquisition of Alaska. But what about this crucial slice of land that reshaped the American Southwest? Stick around, because this story involves railroads, political intrigue, and a deal that almost didn't happen. So, let's set the scene. The year is 1853. The Mexican-American War ended just 5 years earlier with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. That treaty had transferred a massive amount of territory from Mexico to the United States, including modern-day California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of several other states. The border was set, but it wasn't perfect. In fact, it was causing some serious headaches, especially for one very ambitious project, a transcontinental railroad. Now, in the mid-19th century, building a railroad across the entire country was the equivalent of the space race. It was a monumental undertaking that promised to connect the East Coast with the newly acquired territories on the Pacific. Several routes were proposed, but the one favored by many Southern politicians, including Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, was a southern route. Why? Well, it avoided the treacherous Rocky Mountains further north and could operate year-round without being blocked by snow. There was just one problem. The ideal path for this southern railroad, specifically through the Mesilla Valley, dipped south of the border established in 1848. The terrain north of the Gila River was just too mountainous and rugged for railroad construction at the time. To build their dream railroad, the United States needed a piece of land that was still part of Mexico. This geographical obstacle became the primary motivation for what would become the Gadsden Purchase. At the same time, tensions were simmering along the new border. Disputes over the exact boundary line were common, and both American and Mexican settlers were caught in the middle. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo also had a clause, Article 15, which obligated the U.S. to prevent Native American raids from its territory into Mexico. This proved incredibly difficult and expensive to enforce, and Mexico was filing millions of dollars in claims against the U.S. for failing to uphold this promise. So, you have the U.S. needing land for a railroad and wanting to get out of its costly treaty obligations. On the other side, you have Mexico, led by the controversial and cash-strapped President Antonio López de Santa Anna. Yes, the very same Santa Anna from the Texas Revolution and the Mexican-American War. He had returned to power and was in desperate need of money to fund his army and stabilize his government. The stage was set for a deal. Enter James Gadsden, a South Carolina railroad promoter and diplomat. President Franklin Pierce appointed him as the U.S. Minister to Mexico with one clear objective: buy the land. Gadsden was a passionate advocate for the Southern Railroad route, and he arrived in Mexico City ready to negotiate. His initial instructions were ambitious. He was authorized to offer up to $50 million for a massive swath of northern Mexico, which would have included much of Chihuahua, Sonora, and the entire Baja California peninsula. But Santa Anna and the Mexican government were not interested in another large-scale land cession. The memory of the recent war was still fresh, and public opinion was strongly against selling any more territory to the Americans. The negotiations were tense. Santa Anna needed the money, but he couldn't appear weak. Gadsden, for his part, pushed hard, but he quickly realized that his grand ambitions were unrealistic. The Mexican negotiators were firm. They would only consider selling the minimum amount of land necessary for the railroad, After much back and forth, they finally agreed on a much smaller parcel. The final deal, known as the Treaty of Mesilla in Mexico, was signed on December 30th, 1853. The United States would pay $15 million for about 45,000 square miles of land, and in return, Mexico would be released from the claims under Article 15 of the previous treaty, which was also nullified. The agreed-upon territory was just enough to secure the Mesilla Valley and provide a workable route for the Southern Transcontinental Railroad. But the story doesn't end there. The treaty then had to be ratified by the U.S. Senate, and it faced significant opposition. Anti-slavery senators from the North were deeply suspicious. They saw the purchase as a scheme to create more slave-holding territory and increase the political power of the South. Remember, Jefferson Davis was a major proponent, and the Southern route was seen as a pro-slavery project. They argued against spending millions on what they called a worthless desert. Others opposed the treaty simply because they felt it was too expensive or because they disliked James Gadsden personally. The debate in the Senate was fierce. To get the treaty passed, it had to be amended. The price was reduced from $15 million to $10 million, and the amount of land was also slightly reduced to its final size of about 29,670 square miles. The new boundary line was clearly defined, finally resolving the lingering border disputes from the previous treaty. With these changes, the Gadsden Purchase Treaty was finally ratified by the Senate in April 1854 by a very slim margin. It was then approved by Santa Anna's government, and the deal was officially proclaimed on June 30th, 1854. So, what was the ultimate legacy of this $10 million deal? First and foremost, it finalized the border between the United States and Mexico that we know today. The land acquired makes up the southern portions of modern-day Arizona and New Mexico, including cities like Tucson and Yuma. Ironically, the Southern Transcontinental Railroad, the very reason for the purchase, wasn't built for another 2 decades. The outbreak of the Civil War shifted political priorities and power to the north, and the first transcontinental railroad was completed along a more central route in 1869. The Southern Pacific Railroad did eventually build through the Gadsden Purchase territory, but not until the 1880s. For Mexico, the sale was highly controversial. It provided Santa Anna with short-term funds, but it cost him politically. Less than a year after the treaty was finalized, he was overthrown and forced into exile once again, with the sale of the Mesilla Valley being one of the primary grievances against him. The Gadsden Purchase is a perfect example of how complex history can be. It wasn't just a simple real estate transaction. It was a convergence of technological ambition, political maneuvering, sectional tensions over slavery, and the lingering consequences of war. It's a story about a railroad that wasn't built on time, a border that was redrawn, and a deal that shaped the map of the American Southwest in a way that few people today realize. It's a small purchase with a huge impact. What do you think? Was the Gadsden Purchase a brilliant strategic move or a controversial land grab? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into a lesser-known piece of history, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. We'll see you in the next video.